Well, good evening, IFL fans. After a 7 month wait, actually over 7 months, it gives me great delight to finally say that it is Wager Wednesday in the Indoor Football League. And I couldn't be more delighted that this time of the year has come. March is unquestionably the best month in sports. We've got March Madness right around the corner, playoff races heating up for the NBA and the NHL. And this weekend, the start of the Indoor Football League season. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Alex Schuberth. I am an avid IFL fan. I actually do some work as a part time IFL contributor over for Sports Coast to Coast, which is a sports forum site. They're based out in the Pacific Northwest, and they specialize in IFL coverage from pregame game previews to recaps and basically everything in between. Team by team roster, transaction updates. Essentially, everything is there for your IFL needs. So, I have the website down below in the description. Definitely take a look. Highly recommend it. There, you will also see my written posts for these Wager Wednesday episodes. So, the video aspect is a new feature. I'm hoping I can get some fan engagement as I go through my selections. And yeah, I'm hoping this is going to be a fun time. It's going to be a great season. We've got 16 teams competing in the 16th season of IFL play. So, what I will do now is share my screen. So, with this being the opening week, it's going to provide a little bit of a different flavor in terms of kind of reflecting on the past and looking more towards the present, simply because we haven't had an indoor football league game since the championship back on August 5th of last year. Um, so let's first highlight what we're going to go over tonight. We'll go over the rationale for why Wager Wednesday. What's the point of doing this whole exercise in the first place? So I'll go over kind of how I came up with the concept and why it presents value to indoor football league fans as a whole. We'll go over the success that we've had in the 2023 season. We'll go through the results from a season ago and highlight some season-long trends that we picked up along the way based on the numbers. Once we do that, we'll chart course for 2024. I'll go over some week-to-week and season-long goals that I have in mind, and we'll wrap up with what everybody wants to see, the pair of week one games and my selections therein. So buckle up. We're in for a treat. So Wager Wednesday, it's a concept that I came up with last year after sports betting had been legalized in my home state of Massachusetts. On the menu for that was Indoor Football League. So if you haven't been able to tell already, the first thing to know about me, I am a very numbers-oriented guy. I am fascinated by the science of the numbers and what the interpretations of those, like what stories that the numbers can tell. Sports analytics, I've been particularly interested in since high school. I know baseball is much further along with like sabermetrics and advanced analytics than a bunch of other sports are. But applying some of those same concepts to the world of indoor football definitely presents a lot of value. And that concept kind of blends into what exactly is it that we are going for when picking these games? Are we going for best record or are we going for best value? Because there's a difference between the two. There's a record standpoint of it and a money standpoint of it. we could come in here each week and say, oh, yeah, the home team's heavily favored. Let's just pick them straight up to win. We might win 75% of the time, but a lot of those instances, those favorites are going to be very heavily favored, high percentage chance to win. So the return on those bets is not going to be as much. We'll get to some more of the science behind that in a minute. What I go for and what I went for last year is taking a look at value picks where some teams might be under or overvalued, or the projected point total for those games is a little bit off from what my model expects. So anytime that there's a deviation between those two, we kind of take a step back and say, does our logic make sense? Do the line logic make sense? If so, if there's a mismatch there, that might be something to look at and potentially capitalize off. So for this season, I'm going to continue with my flat betting method of evaluation, in which I just simply put $10 on each game. So this week I'll have a $20 budget. And something new that I'm interested in trying out this year is a weighted game-by-game betting method. So obviously, like the slide says, new to this year, budget's going to be 10 times the number of games for the week. So this week we'll have 2 games for $20. Next week we'll have $60 on the line across 6 games. The amount per bet is going to be no greater, or it must be greater than half a unit or $5, but it can't be anything more than 2 units, $20. We want to have a pretty significant amount of representation in each game and making sure that the financial part balances out in the end. So I'm curious to see how that winds up as we go through the season to see if there's a significant difference between the two methods. We will be constructing 3-leg parlays starting in week 2. I know that DraftKings up here in Mass doesn't do same game parlays from what I know. I know it's available in some other sports books in other states where you have the power to do that. But for right now, we'll focus on the parlays starting next week. Another thing that I'm looking at as we move forward with the season is making sure that the amount bet on each of the 3 types of bets, which we'll get to in a little while, is roughly equal. Now, if last year was any indication, the money line bet, or just picking straight up who wins the game, is not a guarantee to be available. And that happens in cases where one team is significantly favored over the other team. Last year, that tended to be around 10, 11 points on average, where the money line would or would not become available for regular season games. So if I can, I'll try to have at least one type of bet per week where we have obviously more than 2 games. But that'll be something that I keep in mind as I continue to analyze these going forward. Each week we'll have a recap of the past week's games to see how are we doing. And this will be a continuous running total, see kind of like the trends. Are we moving up? Are we moving down? Might there be an adjustment that we have to make on my model that I use? So these will all be, recurring questions that will, continue to be answering, continue to be refining, ideating. As we go for all the value here. So up now, I have some betting definitions. I know some of you may not be as familiar with betting, so I want to make sure that the terminology used is easy for everybody to understand to ensure that everybody is on. So I will start, and I may have mentioned this concept earlier, is the concept of a spread bet, which essentially assigns a point handicap to the favored team, and it says Team A must win this game by X amount of points in order for the bet to win. So, for example, if we had a game involving the Bay Area Panthers this year and they were minus 3.5, that means that the Panthers were 3.5 point favorites in that game, which means that they needed to win by 4 or more points to cash that bet. Anytime that the favored team does, they either meet or exceed that margin of victory. That's also known as covering the spread. Conversely, if Bay Area were to outright lose that game, or if their win was only by 3 points or fewer, then the bet would settle as a loss, and the underdog side, usually listed as plus that same handicap, would be the winner for that game. So some terminology that you might hear me say here and write down in the written posts over at SC2C. I'll say laying the points for any time that I'm selecting the favorite in the game, and I'll be taking the points for any underdogs that I wish to select. We'll go now to our second type of bet here, which is called the over-under, which is basically take the score from both teams, add them up, and that's your total. So if we were looking at a game between the Sharks and the Fighters, it has an over-under set at 93.5. Let's say the Fighters win 50-47. Maybe they get a game-winning field goal. 50 plus 47 gives you 97 points. So anybody who had wagered on the over in that game would take home some winnings. So that one, have to think about a little bit, but not too tricky to understand, I don't think. So with those couple examples before, we saw that the set totals for the points usually came in half-point intervals. Now, indoor football is not so weird to the point where we're issuing half points to teams. Every point scored is a whole number. So why the half point? That half point in betting parlance is called the hook. And all that it does is that it ensures that there's a winning side to the bet and a losing side to the bet. Every once in a while, you'll get a spread bet here that's an even number. Like, let's say it's -6. And let's say Sioux Falls is favored in that game and they win 50-44. So it'd be a 6-point margin of victory. The spread would be exactly 6. The bet would settle as a tie. Also called push or avoid. Basically, long story short, you get your original money back. So the hook ensures that there's 2 mutually exclusive outcomes. Either you win the bet or you don't. The third type of bet that we'll be delving in throughout the season is called the money line. And this is basically just a straight up bet. Who do you think wins? So the example that I have, and I get into some of the definition of the odds with this example, is let's say we have a game, Vegas playing the Duke City Gladiators. The Nighthawks might be listed at -150, Duke City at +130. So the minus or the plus in front of those numbers simply indicates whether you're quote unquote laying money or not. So the team with the minus odds, or in some cases the greater number at the minus, is the favorite. And the minus basically says in order to win $150, you would need to risk, in order to win $100, you would need to risk $150. And if you were betting on Duke City, the plus number indicates that you would need to bet 100 in order to win that amount. So if you bet the Vegas Nighthawks for $15 and they win, you get $10 of winnings, payout of $25. And if you bet Duke City for $10 and the Gladiators win, In this scenario, you would win $13 for a total payout of $23. Um, most spread and over-under bets that we'll be delving in will have odds of minus 110. So basically laying a dime on the dollar. But sometimes those change. They might be minus 115, they might be minus 120. It just depends on when you're looking at the bets, at which point in time. Because the odds do change. They can change prior to kickoff, depending on how much money is flowing on one side or the other of the bets. So that is a quick synopsis of some of the basics of understanding the terminology of betting. Let's go to some of the results that we had from a season ago. So across the board, it was an absolute smashing success. We had a statistically significant winning record, 58 wins to 46 losses. Going to the table on the right, I divided it out by the type of bet, which was over-unders, spreads, and money lines. We got winning records in all three types, especially impressive with the over-unders, considering that I started 0 for 5 with those. And the consistency that we had during this stretch was absolutely ridiculous. Starting from week 6, going all the way to the end of the regular season, week 18, there was only 1 week where we did not have a winning record and net gain. Every other week along that stretch, we had a win-loss record on the betting side of at least 50% and net gain. In our end results for the season, I came up with a total return of investment of over 12%, which is essentially double of the average portfolio of the stock market. So, absolutely sensational result last year. Hoping for much of the same this year, obviously. We'll have to see if we can replicate that money line magic. That was definitely the bulk of the winnings from a season ago. I think I accounted for around 85 bucks gain. So, like I said, it was a fantastic season last year, but the challenge is got to do it again this year. And I look forward to that challenge. So while I was running through numbers in the off season, looking at the historic results from 2023, there were a lot of things that stood out to me. The first one of which is home teams had a ridiculously efficient time covering the spread. 68 and 37 across the 105 regular season games. Translation: if you put $10 on the home team and the home team only, on only the spread, you would have made out with about $250 in full on the season. You're looking at a 24% ROI, which is basically double what I made with my more diversified selection. So if we're ever in a spot where we're doubting kind of which way to go, which bet to take, I might find myself defaulting to whoever the home team is covering the spread. So that was definitely a significant result that I saw. And continuing on with underdogs, they were absolutely fantastic whenever the spread was 3 points or fewer. And this is something where if you've read any bit of analysis of sports betting, football specifically, a lot of those experts will say that there's a sizable difference between a 3-point spread and a 3.5 point spread, simply because of the nature of the way that points are scored in the game. Most of the time, it'll be intervals of 3 points or 6 or 7 points in the case of a touchdown. So anytime that the underdog was only being given 3 points or fewer, they were still winning the vast majority of the time. 10 out of the 14 games last season that had that spread was going to the underdog. As soon as you shifted that to a 3.5 point spread, magic a little bit. They were still winning for them from 3.5 to 7.0. But again, once you got to that 7.5 threshold, again, you saw an underdog spike in win rate. So you'll hear me say it essentially anytime that it comes up throughout the course of this season. 3.5 and 7.5 are magic numbers when it comes to analyzing spread bets. Where even that half point could swing me from one side to the other. The numbers say it. It's that specific. Or it's that precise. So the last trend that I looked at is over-unders, because I know I mentioned before I really struggled with these early on. So I wanted to see, looking at basically the inherent nature of indoor football. You could have pretty much any two teams that you want. What exactly does the typical IFL game look like? Obviously, it's high scoring. And I basically found two numbers that tended to be disproportionately favoring one side of the over-under over the other. So anytime that the spread, or not the spread, anytime that the implied total was 84.5 or less, the over won 9 out of those 14 games. And I can tell you right now that 2 of those losses were games involving the Northern Arizona Wranglers and the Tucson Sugar Skulls, 2 of the most defensively efficient and slowest tempo teams in the IFL from a season ago. Under hits or goes below, and trusting that we get a decent amount of short field scores to kind of help take that to the promised land. On the other side of things, once we get to implied total, and I chose 97.5 for this look, 1.5 or more, unders were 23 and 10. So looking at 70% roughly there. So really anything within 84.5 to 97.5, we'll have to do a little bit more number crunching to kind of see, how does matchup between these two teams specifically play a role in how I think about evaluating this wager. So 2024 goals. I'm obviously looking to follow a really successful 2023 season with an even more profitable 2024 campaign. That is a lofty goal, but one that I firmly believe can be reached if enough breaks go our way. Anything at or near last year's total ROI would be a terrific result. And if we can repeat last year's feat of positive results in all 3 categories, that would just be the cherry on top of the sundae, as it were. Another thing that I'm going to be tracking a little bit more closely this year is my 3-leg parlays, which again we'll be starting with next week. I'm looking to get at least 4 of these. So again, these are lofty goals, but that's half the fun of trying your luck at these. So before I move forward, I do have to take a minute and acknowledge that we are talking about the world of sports wagering, which is a very mercurial topic, to say the least. And it's a very serious topic, so I want to be treating it as such here. So first off, the lines and odds that I'm going to be using here are specifically from DraftKings Sportsbook, unless I otherwise say. And we're going to be doing this not for money making purposes, purely for entertainment and I guess educational purposes, if you want to call it that. There's no such thing as a guarantee or a lock in the sports wagering world. There's always going to be that I don't believe it, unbelievable moment um, that could really swing things. So, again, it can be dangerous waters. Just make sure that you're treading lightly if you do decide to play. Um, Obviously, I'm going to be making my selections here. You are more than welcome to follow them if you do so, but please tail at your own risk. I am not guaranteeing results are going to be happening. I am just putting together my best educated guess at what the outcome might be. I'm not a fortune teller. Otherwise, I probably would have been claimed by somebody by now. And in most jurisdictions, you've got to be 21 or older to play. So we are not promoting underage gambling in any way, shape, or form. The game is more fun when your wagering is fun. So practice safe gaming habits, have a limit, put on the line only what you can reasonably afford to lose, and if needed, set your time and spending limits as appropriate. And if your loved one is having trouble with problem gaming, there's a bunch of resources on both the state and federal level that you can refer to. I put one as an example down there, haveagameplan.org. It's got some really good resources for help, education, on really what it takes to be a safe gamer. So, all that being said, I know we've gone nearly half an hour basically of introductions. Let's waste no further time and get right to the betting lines. Give me one sec here. Oops. Okay, there we go. So, like I said before, we've got two games on the docket, and I will magnify this a little bit. Not that much. There we go. So, two games on the calendar. We have a Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern start. That is our season opener between the Arizona Rattlers and the Northern Arizona Wranglers. These lines look pretty much on point with what I was expecting, to be honest. The only one that kind of deviated a bunch from what I thought was the over-under of 96.5. That seems high to me. And I know that there was a bunch of Rattlers Wranglers games in recent memory that hit that number, that went over that number. The playoff game was, I think it was like 60 something to 50 something. It went well over 100. And their game of the year in the regular season was a 63-62 game. Granted, that one went into double overtime, so it got 20 whatever bonus points in the additional frame. But this just, like I said, this number just seems high, especially with a Northern Arizona Wranglers game. This team loves to play defense. They have since Les Moss took over in 2022. I have this line at an 89.5 for an implied point total. But the bet that I'm going to be taking here is actually Arizona spread. Because simply, that Kevin Guy and his gang are going to have that extra factor of motivation playing against a team that's knocked them out each of the past 2 years in absolutely stunning upset fashion. Um, like I wrote in post, they covered at this number last year, opening on the road against a really good Quad City team that was really sensational to begin the season. Um, and the other thing for the Wranglers, too, is that I just question how they're going to be able to put up points. They're relying on a bunch of young guys. They do have Jared Ware Jr. returning as a running back / wide receiver hybrid player. But they lost Ramaj Hakia Bowman, Glenn Gibbons Jr., two instrumental pieces from last year in their 2022 run. So I got to see them come up with a reasonable effort on offense before I can justify selecting them really in any capacity. And the more I think about it, I'm very torn between taking the over under bet or the spread bet. But since I've already locked in Arizona on the spread, that's what I'm going to be doing. But the under is definitely a significant value play as well. Should be an entertaining game. Commissioner Todd Tryon will be in attendance in person. It's going to be all the hype to open up the season on Saturday night. The second game of week one, the final game of week one, will go down in Green Bay. The Blizzard, looking to make the playoffs for the first time in the post-COVID era. They're up against the Massachusetts Pirates. So the Pirates are laying 3.5 points. Over-under is 91.5. And you see those money line totals. Minus 148 for the Pirates, plus 124 for the Blizzard. And this is kind of an advantage of having a couple of months, really, to think about these games. And the thing that I kept going back to is, the Pirates are expected to be good. They're probably going to be good. At their best, they could compete with Frisco for the top seed in the East. There's just one problem. I've seen nothing from them, especially last year, where their game carries well away from home. In fact, they were 0-9 on the road against the spread last year. They were the only winless team in the league in that category. I mean, Tulsa, Iowa, Vegas even had some road wins against the spread. But the Pirates, for whatever reason, their game didn't carry well outside of the Bay State. I think the number for the spread is right. I'd probably tilt that 1 or 2 more points favoring Green Bay. I could have gone cheeky here and went with the money line for the Blizzard. But in the end, I'm playing it a little bit safe, going with this Green Bay, taking the plus 3.5 points. You never know if that field goal is going to matter, especially with each installment of this series in the Resch Center essentially being an instant classic. The margins of victory were 4, 7, and 1. And 2 of those games reached overtime in 2022 and 2023. So this is a prime example of a bet where I'm looking at the Pirates specifically and I'm saying, until you can win me a game on the road, or at the very least, perform up to the expectations of it, this is as easy of a fade as it gets. Trust me, I love my hometown Pirates, but they're going to have to start this season with something to prove. As far as the over-under goes, I definitely like the over for that game. My model has this game at 96.5 points. It's going to be interesting to see how Green Bay's offense, with a bunch of new pieces, with the exception of Max Myler at quarterback, how that dynamic kind of goes. It should be a pretty fast-paced game. if last year was any indication. So that's where my money would be going if I were forced to take a bet on the over-under. So that is it for this week. Like I said, just a couple games to whet our appetite for what's to come. And that will do it for the first week of Wager Wednesday. Again, my name is Alex Schuberth. I recommend checking out Sports Coast to Coast. Again, that web address is in the description. Let's print out the big bucks. We'll see you next week.